Again, we'll ask, as Bart noted, people are welcome to come closer, but please make sure to maintain appropriate social distancing so we keep everyone here safe. We're going to start with the Perek Tehillim. We're going to start with Perek Chaf Gimel. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echzor, binos tesher yabitzeini, amei menuchos yinaleini. Nafshi yishovev, yankeni b'maglei tzedek leman shimo, gam ki elech b'geit zamoves, lo yivera ki ata imodi. Shivtecho mishantecho heimo yenachamuni, taok lefanai shulchan, neged zoreroi, dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi rivoyo. Achtov v'chesed yidafuni ko yemei kayai, v'shabti v'es Adonai liorech yomim. We've come together this afternoon to pay our respects on the mourning the loss of an incredible woman, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a Holocaust survivor who inspired the lives of so many by the way she lived her life, Gita Frankel, Bas David. I'm going to start off with a few remarks, and really many remarks. The story I'm going to tell is the story of her life, a story that she told so many times. And then I'm going to turn it over to her grandson, Yireinu Kol Avrami, who really say Dvarim Hayotzim Min Halev, words from the heart. Her family's roots were in Poland for many generations. Gita was raised in Kalisz with her parents and her two brothers. Despite the hardships and the anti-Semitism, she lived a rich Jewish life. Her brothers attended yeshiva. She went to religious school in the afternoon. Right before the Holocaust, there were 20,000 Jews in the city, making up half of the population. But of course, everything changed in 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland. Initially, her family fled to Zedinska Wola, her mother's birthplace, and then they lived in a ghetto. 8,000 Jews in 3 streets. Food was scarce, and it was rationed. In September 1942, the Jews were forced to march to a Jewish cemetery for a selection. To the right meant death, to the left meant life. His 12-year-old brother, Aaron, was selected to the death camp of Chelma. Her father tried to intercede and was shot dead in front of his family, while her brother was taken to his death. Gita, her mother, and her brother Yosef went with thousands on crowded railroad cars. It was a journey that took 3 days to the Lodz ghetto. There was such a scarcity of food that their hunger was even worse than had been before. While she watched, her brother Yosef grew weak and died of starvation. In front of her, she had seen her father and her 2 brothers die. Eventually, she and her mother were taken to Auschwitz. They were supposed to be gassed immediately, and therefore did not even receive tattoos on their arms. They endured the terrible degradation, never knowing each day if they were destined to die at that moment. They were then taken to Stutthof, another concentration camp that didn't even have beds in the bunkers, before she alone was sent to Proust, a labor camp, and separated from her mother. And she feared her mother would die, she feared she would die, but miraculously, not only did she herself survive, but she was reunited with her mother as well. They went on a final death march to the sea, with Gita literally dragging her mother along. When they passed the village, they escaped and were ultimately liberated by the Russians. After all the things she had gone through, all the horror she had witnessed, all the things we had just mentioned, it would have been natural for her to be bitter and angry. But she amazingly transcended it all and was adamant in retaining her humanity. I have to give thanks. She was very close to so many people in the community. She was also very close to David Gould and Frankie Goldberg, and they shared with me 2 interesting stories that really illustrated this humanity that she had. Even as she was recuperating from her own weakness, a young German girl ran into her room to escape the Russian soldiers who were clearly abusing her. And the girl prayed for help, do something, and she protected that young girl, had hid her until the soldiers had left. After all she had gone through, nothing could take away her yashrut and her own dignity. When asked what she would say to Hitler, if she would see him, her answer would simply be, "I survived, and you didn't." She rebuilt her life with Gita Frankel, another survivor of the Holocaust. Her family meant everything to her. She would often remark that they were her dividends, her children, her grandchildren, and Baruch Hashem, her great-grandchildren. She became the head of the food program of the Federation, a position she held for 37 years. She was self-taught. She simply took charge and became renowned for the different foods she would make. Nothing would stop her. In fact, I was told that in 1967 when there were terrible riots and no one could get through, and she was stopped, and she said, no, I have to get through. And when she had to get through, she got through. This was the method she used to embrace everyone, embracing everyone with food. The Glirot Synagogue, she was a core member of the sisterhood, making the latkes and the other foods for the entire shul. But most importantly, she proudly and unabashedly told her story. I see here Mark Sachs. I know that she was encouraged by Icha Stravinsky, and she spoke all over to countless groups, Jewish groups, non-Jewish groups alike, so that they understood the horrors of the Holocaust. Children and adults were moved by her presentations and by her very presence, by her essence, and she kept up with them for many years. She even maintained a lengthy correspondence with a gentleman in Poland who cared for the kvarim, the graves of her family members, because she was so impressed with them. She was such an incredible role model. The lessons of her life, the ability to go through so much and not only survive, but build a legacy, to touch so many individuals. It's a powerful loss for our community. And it's a powerful lesson, of course. Now we are during the 9 days, the week of Tisha B'Av itself, a week where we're mourning the Churban Beis Hamikdash, and work with the mourning what happens when there's hate. She transcended it. Her legacy is the legacy, the people that she touched, all the countless individuals she encountered. Her greatest legacy, of course, is her family. Yehi Zichra Baruch. May her memory be a blessing. At this moment, we're going to set up the equipment, move it over, so that her grandson Avrami, who cannot be in the Beis Olam, the Kohen, is going to deliver the head.
On the microphone. No. Sorry. Everyone's able to hear? Try to encapsulate as much as I can from my grandmother's life. I had the opportunity to be extraordinarily close to my grandmother. Through her lifetime, I had the opportunity to be extraordinarily close to my grandmother. We practically grew up to a certain extent in her house, myself and my sister Elishava, and we merited to learn a tremendous amount from her. I'd like to speak out different topics of things that I learned from her. The first topic I'd like to mention, the first thing that we learned very strongly from her is faith in Hashem, emunah. She always said, my grandmother always said, she never lost her faith in Hashem. She never lost her faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Through all that she went through, she never ever lost faith in Hashem. She always mentioned Hashem's name. Mrs. Surti Barkin, she should be gesund stark, once told me that she discussed my Uma's mother, my grandmother's mother, and she talked about how she was a woman from the earlier generations who always mentioned Hashem's name at all times. She always mentioned Hashem's name. And she had a tremendous self-sacrifice to spread amazing stories of belief in Hashgacha Pratis and how Hashem ruled the world. She always told, and the stories that she told when she went and she spoke in colleges and she spoke in high schools, she spoke in schools, were with tremendous self-sacrifice. Everyone saw a woman who knows so much and went through so much, but no one knew what she went through at night after she spoke, how much it tore her heart out to relive everything. But she felt that was part of her life's goal, was to say over these stories that brought out a tremendous faith in Hashem, faith in God, for running the world in every aspect of the world. And these stories that she said and the speeches were with tremendous self-sacrifice. But that would also bring out a faith in Hashem. The second idea is her tremendous giving to her family. She was tremendously giving to her family. She always said you could choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. Family was extremely dear to her. She spent endless hours with myself and my sister Elisheva. When my mother worked very, very hard when we were growing up, when my mother was working and we had off of school, we would go with my grandmother, my sister and I. We would go to work with her and we would help her, and she ran the kosher federation, the federation's kosher kitchen, which was for 40 years. It's probably the oldest kosher restaurant in America. For 40 years she ran a kosher restaurant, and this was 20 years ago that she stopped. So 60 years ago she was running a kosher kitchen in the Jewish Federation in order that meetings and all sorts of important get-togethers could happen. She always said about her grandchildren that her grandchildren were her dividends of life. She truly felt that the reason she survived was to see her grandchildren and her children. She always cared about all her grandchildren. She always asked about their health. And she always looked at us and said that this is the reason I survived. She spent much time with us as we were children. She was a tremendously loving, caring person. She used to take us gardening in her backyard, and I remember so vividly, I went with Lisa last week and I showed her around my grandmother's backyard every area that we went gardening, whether it was raspberries or wild berries or tomatoes, every single part of it. She was so patient and loving and taught us everything with such care. She always told us how much we were in her heart, and she always did everything she could to make us happy. She made cakes for us that we loved and all sorts of different salads that we loved so much. She sent my uncle to yeshiva, to Telz Yeshiva. She sent my mother to Hebrew Academy, to seminary. She told us that when my uncle David was in yeshiva, in those days driving to Telz Yeshiva a half hour away, they had to go get a tune-up before they would go. And they would go, and it was a big deal for them to go see their son learning in yeshiva. And she loved to have pictures of us and my children. She loved to have pictures. She always said, we need more pictures and more pictures. She was very joyful in life and loved to have joyous things around her. Whenever we came, she would give us a little bit of money and say, go buy Eppes for the Kinderlach. Discussing now her relationship with friends and community and how she spoke about the Holocaust, she always said in general, talking about friends, that the most important thing in life, she used to say always, is a shem tov, a good name. And she always felt that everything a person does has to be in the direction to establish for themselves a positive name. She was extremely loved by many people, by all people. She was extremely warm and loving, like I mentioned. She was a survivor of the Holocaust for the entire length of the time of the Holocaust. A doctor recently said, when they evaluated her and the nurses were working on her, a doctor grouped the nurses together, and the doctor said, I know you're trying very hard to keep my grandmother alive, but she's a survivor, you have to try harder. She went to Beis Yaakov before the war, and she used to share vivid memories of going to school before the war and of her parents' household, and she told us of chesed that her parents did, which I'll get to the aspect of chesed, of the kindness and the charitable goods that she did. There was a story during the war where she was separated for quite a period of time during the war from her mother, and obviously she never thought she would see her mother. And it came in a point, and I don't remember all the details, but she saw her mother at one point, and she ran towards her, and they gathered together, and once again they were going to be separated sometime afterwards, and she refused to separate from her mother. She said, if I can't be with my mother, it's not worth living. And a German guard came to her and said, go away, separate, you have to go into a different line. She said, I'm not leaving my mother's side. So the German looked at her, he was going to shoot her and kill her. So he asked her what her name was. So she said, my name is Engel. So the German guard got shaken up. He said, my name is also Engel. And he let her go free. She never had numbers, I was told, because she was really supposed to be killed initially at the beginning of the war. And somehow her transport car, when it came, the gas chambers were full and it got held up, and somehow they got loose and separated and got away from it. But she always told us the story, and I heard the story numerous times from her, that they saved the life of a child during the war. She didn't remember how long that they were able to save the life, but she worked in the laundry room and she washed the garments, the clothing of the German officers, Yimach Shema B'Zichram. And it was a gigantic heap of clothing. And one time a child ran from the line to go to the gas chamber into the laundry room, and they quickly stuffed him into the laundry pile. And she told me that all of the workers who were there with her sacrificed food to keep the child alive. She said they only got, their ration was they got 1 or 2 pieces of bread a day, a cup of water, a bowl of soup that she says was also a cup of water, and 3 potatoes a week. That was their whole ration of food. And from that, all of the people in the laundry room rationed off food to be able to give to this child, to keep this child alive inside the pile of clothing in the laundry room. I believe that eventually they found the child, but apparently they didn't do anything to anyone, which was also obviously a miracle that no one was hurt who saved him. She was a tremendous balas achrayas. Everything was done with tremendous order. Everything in the house was always clean and orderly, and everything she did, the fact that she managed the whole kitchen, everything was tremendously orderly and clean and neat. I want to speak a little bit about her chesed. I believe it was in 1999 that she retired from the Federation. I believe it was 1999. I saw a plaque in the house. And she retired from the Federation after having worked there for 40 years running the kosher kitchen. And I was honored to speak then by her goodbye dinner that they made on her honor. And what I said at that time was, I said a Gemara in Sukkah, that the Gemara says that there's 3 differences between chesed and tzedakah. Tzedakah is charity and chesed is well-doing, doing well to others. And the Gemara says that charity is only with money, but doing good for others is both with money and with actions. And charity is only to poor people, but doing good for other people is to all different types of people. And charity is only to living people, but doing good for others is even to people who are no longer alive. This embodied my grandmother, this idea of doing chesed and loving people, in terms of the amount that she did for everyone who came into the Federation, in terms of her self-sacrifice, to talk about the Holocaust, to share memories, to share faith in Hashem, to share the faith and the understanding that Hashem runs the world even in all the hardships that happen, and to share with everyone, and to the kindness that she did for her grandchildren, and the kindness she did for everyone, and how she was so beloved and loved everyone. She put, over there it says that when we talk about doing chesed, the Gemara says also a similar idea over there, that the reward for charitable acts is based on how much heart a person puts into it. And one of the Mefarshim, the Meiri, explains that how much they work to make the food good. He says that they work hard that the food should be good. So that embodied my grandmother, how much she put into the food, how much love and care she put into all the food she did. And the Gemara over there also in Sukkah says, according to one girsa, that any person that has chesed, we know that they fear Hashem, they fear God. And in the other girsa in the Gemara it says anyone who has chen, anyone who's beloved, you could tell that they fear God. In both ways of understanding what the Gemara is saying embody my grandmother, how she was beloved and how she did so much for every person. That embodied my grandmother, and it showed that those are symbols of someone who truly recognizes God and fears God. in that which she did for other people, she did chesed and she did good things for people, showed not that she just did acts of goodness, but she was what's called an oyev chesed. She was a roidev chesed. She ran to do charitable acts. She ran to do goodness to people. She loved it. It was part of her essence. It wasn't something she did on occasion. It was something she did constantly to run and do charitable, beautiful, caring, loving acts for people. My sister told me that she told her when she was younger that she saved money all the time because she was worried that one day she may need money and she didn't want to have to borrow or take money from other people. This was also an aspect of her being a giver. Her whole essence was of being a giver, not a taker. She wanted to always give. I'm going to get involved in shortly about the last week of her life, but this was also very prevalent in the last week of her life. She loved to give brachas, to give blessings to her children, her grandchildren. She always told us, "Gezind parnosa atzlacha," nachas from the kinderloch. She always wanted us to be healthy, have the money that we need to support our family, and have goodness and enjoy from our children. Oma's mother was the mikveh lady in Cleveland right after the war, and Oma also took over that position sometimes. She subbed for her mother. I had the tremendous honor, and it's an amazing event that happened, that I spent the last week of her life with her. And through so many different events that happened, and there were many opportunities for me to come to Cleveland, and if it didn't work out and I didn't come and I was busy with different things with my family and other different things. And it just so happened that we felt that this incident, that she was in Montefiore and she wasn't doing well and she was spiraling out of, her health was spiraling, gave an opportunity that I rushed and I booked a ticket and I spent the last week of her life with her. And it was an extremely warm and loving week that I was able to talk to her. She was calm. She was much calmer than she was before. And she knew I was there the whole time. I was sitting by the dining room table behind her, while she was sitting facing the front of the house. And she knew I was there the whole time. She called my name even though she didn't see me. She felt very much attached to me and aware and close with me being there. She thanked everyone with tremendous heart, and she also spent time going outside with Elishava and her children. She went to the backyard and she got to spend time with them, and it brought a tremendous joy to her. And there was something that happened that was tremendously impactful on me in the last week of her. There were two things that happened in her last week. The first is that I've talked about her unbelievable desire to do chesed. She looked at me and she could barely talk. She barely had the strength to talk. And she said to me, "I want to help you. I want to do stuff. I want to help you. I want to do for you. I'm not doing enough. I want to do more." This is a woman who is almost 94 years old, could barely breathe, could barely move. And she looked at me with all her soul and said to me, "I want to do for you. I want to do more for you. I'm not doing enough for you." Her whole being, her whole essence was to do for another person. Even when it was impossible to physically do it, she munned from herself, like we would say in Yiddish. She wondered to herself, why can't I do more? I want to do more. And the last thing that she said that was unbelievably impactful to me was in the last week, I sat with her and we said Moida Ani together. And we thanked Hashem for having woken up. We thanked Hashem that she woke up that morning. And she said in a beautiful Polish Havar, Moida Ani lefaneicha, Melech chai v'kayim, Sheikh Zarta binishmusi, Bechemla, Rabbi Emunesecha. She said she thanked Hashem for waking her up, that she was able to get up and she was able to be healthy and be well, and she was surrounded by caring people. And it was a tremendous, and I thank Hashem, and I'd like to say thank you to many people, but the first thing is I'd like to thank Hashem, to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving me the opportunity to spend the last week of her life with her. She couldn't leave the world without spending another week with me. All different things had to happen. I had a ride that was supposed to come and it fell through. And it just worked out. I was able to get a flight and stay a whole week with her. She wasn't able to leave the world. After 93 and almost 94 years, she couldn't leave till she spent the week with me and Elishab and the kids. I want to say thank you to several people. I want to thank my mother. My mother, throughout her upbringing, always taught us how important grandparents are, how important Oma is, how important Opa was. And we used to go every year Pesach for the Starim. Every single year I remember them vividly, and my sister remembers them, and we still follow different minhagim from my grandfather that we remember. We were always imbued with the importance of a grandfather and a grandmother, everything. We were always, Oma is so important to be close to Oma, so important to learn from Oma, so important to know Oma, so important to be with Oma. As I want to thank my mother, and I want to thank my uncle. My uncle did a tremendous amount to care for Oma. He was in the car, out of the car, in a plane, out of the plane, back and forth, involved with everyone, doctors and nurses and everyone, and involved in everyone's care. I want to thank him very much for everything he did. I want to thank Mrs. Rennard for the arrangements that she made, and all the different nurses that were with my grandmother, Mrs. Winters. I want to thank Margie for all the love and care that she did for so many years, and I want to thank Lisa for the unbelievable love and care that she did. She truly loved Oma like a mother. And I want to thank Sandy. She wasn't there for a long time, but she had such a heart, and she was so caring and so loving. And I want to thank anyone else who I didn't mention. I apologize if I didn't mention, but all those who helped with my grandmother, I thank them from the depths of my heart. They should know that they had a tremendous loss. If they helped my grandmother, they had a tremendous loss. It was a tremendous honor for them that they could be around such a person. I daven that Oma Gita Frankel or David should be a Melitz Yosher. She should daven on behalf of myself. She should daven on behalf of my mishpacha, my children. Sein gesund und stark, my wife Sarah Nechama, my son Gabriel, David, Esther, Batsheva, and Miriam, my sister Elishava, and her husband Meir, and their children, Chai Rachel, Shlomo, and Nechama Rus. She should be a Melitz Yosher for my mother. She sein gesund und stark, and my uncle David. She should be a Melitz Yosher for everyone who helped her. She should daven on their behalf and pray on their behalf that everything they should only have good things. Yehi Zichra Baruch.
Frankel when I was on the board of the Hebrew Free Loan, and she used to make me special lunches when I went to these Federation meetings. And I wanted my children, and I wanted to introduce my children to her. So on Shabbos, once in a while, we would come. And the last time we went to visit her was about 6 months ago. It was before the pandemic. And what I can tell you is that as soon as she saw children, my children, there was such energy and such fervor, and she really lit up. And then she always talked about her grandchildren and her other family, Frankie and David Gould, who would come every Shabbos, and you could just tell that when she was with anyone, there was a presence, and it was even to the point of where my 10-year-old son is speaking to this 93-year-old woman about her experience in concentration camps. And the way she explained it was not scary, not frightening. And yesterday, when he heard that she had passed away, he got really sad. Both of them just said, "You mean we won't be able to go visit Mrs. Frankel anymore? And do we go over and tell David and Frankie?" And they were like all concerned and worried. But the point was that she was the one that always told them, go into the dining room, take something to eat. What can I do for you? So I'm echoing what her grandson and what other people have said about her desire to give, and she loved people. So before, I just wanted to say that, and a special thank you to her. And I asked Mechila for not having gone to see her in the last months. So okay, so it's Gittel Pas. Gittel Feiger. Pas. El molei rachamim shochein b'maromim hametzei menucha nechano aval ala kanefei ashechino b'malo Kedoshim uteharim Kezoar rakia mazehirim Esed nishmas Gittel Feiger bas David shelcha le'olamo ba'avur she'anachanu mispalelim bi'adas chorasim nishmoso Began Eden tehem menuchaso Lochein ba'al rachamim Yastirel b'seiser kenofov le'olamim V'yitzror b'yitzror achayim Esen nishmoso Adonai hu nachalo v'so v'sonuach v'sholom v'sholom al mishkovo v'nomar omein.
At this point, we're going to do the kfur, the actual internment. After we've lowered the casket, I'll ask everyone who wants to come to participate in the midst of doing so to come forward. But please be careful in terms of moving the shovel one to the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just leave it.
No, that plank, bring that plank back.
Oh, no, no. It's good.
We should be okay.
Yeah, be good.
What do you want to go around? Watch the camera. No, no, it wobbled and I don't want to knock over. Straight out or straight back?
Right. You see a space there.
Okay, let's go straight back.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the left.
Okay, watch the camera there.
Okay, that's good. Okay, 2 roads.
Sorry.
On gloves, you know, to put on gloves.
After you put on your mask, you step aside.
Yeah, and you can back and go really tilting up. I just let people go all the way. You can put it down. Good. Sorry. Yeah, sure. You do whatever you want. You want. Go ahead, if you want to, go ahead.
Oh, that's it. I just wanted to know.
Okay. So I ask her, would you bring your mother back? I know she just taught Kriya. If she can come back.
She just went to
I know, she just did Kriya. I just want to come back for the end. You're going to do it, my mom. I'll be there, I'll give it over there. You're staying in college? Sir? You're staying in college? He's very good. Serious. Okay. We have enough. Just gonna finish up. We're gonna stay down here. We're gonna stay one more time to show them the rest of the cottage. We'll be here tomorrow afternoon, right? Tomorrow afternoon, giving them another call. There's only 2 children. Tomorrow night? Tomorrow noon.
I don't think you say this time.
Right, I'm just saying a regular
I
time.
think so, yes, to make sure.
Yeah, really happy.
Okay.
I want to thank you for all your help. So much.
You're welcome.
Between, we need some men. No, you want men?
Okay, we're going to say another parak to Tehillim and then we'll say the Kaddish. Michtav LeDavid, Shemen Yaki Chasi, Siba, Chamat Adonai Adonai Ata Tavati Ba Lalecha, Lekdosh Meshe Be'eret, Teim Levadi Regal Chafti Ba, Gibua Atzvas Amachem Bahar Bal Zikn Tehem Yidam Bal Sash Mosam Al Tzvatzoi, Adonai Menazcha Kiva Chasi Ata Mikol Rale, Kavalim Nafli Bani Mima Fanachla Shafroi Lai, Avaregat Adonai Yasher Yatzani Avli Losi Sunikil Yosoi, Shivisi Adonai Deni Tamid, Kimini Belamot, Lachen Tamak, Libi Vegel, Kodi Apatovi Yishkon Lavata, Kilos Azov Nafshi Lisholo, Sitin Chatkoli Roshaka, to the Eni Arachayim, Mitzvot Malchus Panecha Tinimot Mitzvot Kaddish.
Yiskadel v'yiskadei Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'amadi Raki V'sevia Malchusei V'chaychon V'yomechon V'chay D'chol Beis Yisrael V'agalot V'zman Karev V'mromein
Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach
Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Olam Omei Omayah Yisbarach Yishtabach Yispoar Yishaman Yisnasei Yisadar Yisalev Yisalal Shemei D'Kudsha Barichu Le'ela Mikol Berchasa V'shirasa Tush B'chasa V'nechamasa Damran Ba'alma V'mromein Yehei Shalom Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu B'al Kol Yisrael V'mromein
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'mromav V'yaseh Shalom Aleinu B'al Kol Yisrael V'mromein
Amen.